Mehdi Hasan had some things to say about Kamala Harris. And this goes back to the DNC convention. It goes back to the speech that she gave surrounding Gaza. And so before we get to what Mehdi Hasan said on corporate media, by the way, I want to show you what CNN said, how they discussed this issue about the uncommitted movement. They felt as though they should be happy with what they were given. You have to hear the way that they speak about them. So shout out to Case Study QB for this clip. Case Study's always doing the darn thing, discussing how Vice President Harris handled the uncommitted delegates at the DNC. Listen to this.
Let's start with how Harris kind of navigated this at the DNC, which is to say they didn't broke any of it. And in fact, when Susan Rice was talking with my colleague Jake Tapper about the uncommitted faction, they were delegates who were uncommitted to initially Biden, but also Harris. And she basically said, okay, it's a little bit rich that people who aren't not committing to Harris want a piece of the stage at her convention. But it seemed very clear to me they wanted to send a strong message that they were not sort of engaging in this really, while at the same time making sure that she took a tone in her own speech that was different from where Biden was on this. How did you look at all of that?
No, I'm sorry. We'll disprove that in a second. It really wasn't different from where Biden was on that. That is the narrative that corporate media is trying to sell you so that you think that you're getting something different when it comes to Israel and Gaza, but you're not, or that you think you're getting something different when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to Kamala Harris compared to Biden, but you're actually not. And I want to remind everyone the speech that one of the uncommitted movement members wanted to give at the DNC, it was already vetted. So Kamala's team already read the speech. They knew what she was going to say. She did go on to read this speech later on corporate media. So they've been on a number of shows since the DNC convention. And one of the things that was interesting to me is that in that speech, she was endorsing Kamala Harris. And even though she was still endorsing Kamala Harris, they did not want them to speak. They did not want to have a Palestinian American speaker. And as I told you before, that is discrimination.
Yeah, I think that the vice president has shown a strong vision for how to resolve this current war, a call for a ceasefire exchange for hostages, a strong argument for supporting Israeli security, as well as for Palestinian self-determination, ultimately two-state solution.
That's no different from what Biden said.
Hard to understand what more people could want out of a presidential candidate. That was the most forward-leaning speech I've ever seen at a convention. And
it is hard to understand what more could people want. So we're talking about a genocide. We're talking about Palestinians being sexually assaulted at Palestinian detention center, and the soldiers that have done that have been praised as celebrities on Israeli media. We've covered that on this show as well. We're talking about land seizure, the largest land seizure in the West Bank, where Palestinians are being pushed out of their homes. Their homes are being stolen from them. They can't leave to go to work without settlers taking their homes. We have videos of settlers cutting off the water in the West Bank so that Palestinians won't have access to the water. But what more could you want, right? What more could you want? It's just the tone deafness. The tone deafness. So what they are arguing is that because Kamala Harris in her speech said, well, Palestinians need the right to self-determination, et cetera, and Israel has the right to defend itself, that the members of the uncommitted movement and actually Palestinian Americans altogether should just be satisfied with that. They should be happy with that. They shouldn't ask for anything more. When you let one side speak on the stage and talk about their pain and their hurt, but you don't let the other side speak on the stage and talk about their pain and their hurt, especially when there's more casualties on the Palestinian side, that is discrimination. That's bigotry. The same thing that you accuse the Republican Party of doing. The Democratic Party is doing this as well.
I think the crowd responded as well to her calls for Israeli security. And the folks pushing uncommitted, Also had a lot of behind-the-scenes engagement with the campaign. They had official events at the DNC. They were in touch directly. They did move the needle on much of the rhetoric. So that's a win. Take the win. I'm not sure why they're not saying we support you and now we're ready to do more. It seems like a little bit of an own goal, quite frankly.
It is quite embarrassing. I wonder what the media was like, during other press groups around the world. How dare those people ask for anything more? What more could you want? People in Gaza are still dying. People in Gaza are either dying from starvation or from bombs, but they're still dying. And she laughed. So this is the tone deafness. This is the American individualism, right? They're not caring about that. Just be satisfied with the little bit that we gave you. How is that any different from what the Democratic Party says to the voters all the time when we complain? Be happy with the crumbs that we gave you. Otherwise, you're going to get Donald Trump. This is no different. But how do you say that to people who have lost entire family lines to a genocide? How do you say that to those people when you're backing the people that are doing the genocide? And that's funny to her? Corporate media is a big problem because they control the narrative. Now, Mehdi Hasan, however, had some things to say about Kamala Harris's speech, and he was not as friendly and nice about her speech as those two pundits you just saw on CNN were. In fact, he had this discussion. I believe this is on, is this Amar's show? He had this discussion on MSNBC, which is interesting, considering that's the network that he used to be a part of. Listen to what Mehdi says.
I'm back with Mehdi and Dean. Mehdi, let me ask you something. Little things make a difference. And there was one little thing that some people are critical of. In all of this big tent in which room was made for lots and lots of people, there wasn't 2 minutes of room made for an elected, a Palestinian American. Which, ironically, when you look at this uncommitted movement, they were the only people other than Kamala Harris who even had delegates elected to the convention. Tell me what you know about this and what you think about it.
Yeah, so let's just be clear, Ali. A lot of people are saying, well, these people are anti-Democrat, they're anti the Democratic Party. Why should they be allowed on stage? The uncommitted movement came to the Democratic Party having won hundreds of thousands of votes, 700,000 votes in the Democratic Party primaries, right? More than 100,000 in Michigan alone, key swing state. They sent 30 delegates, I think, from multiple states to the DNC. The idea, as Jon Stewart joked this week, sarcastically, over 4 nights, 8 hours a night, they couldn't find a slot for a Palestinian American lawmaker. The uncommitted movement, let's just be clear, because there's been a lot of misinformation floating around. The uncommitted movement, which wants an end to arms being sent to Israel to kill kids in Gaza, offered up multiple voices who were turned down by the DNC. Finally, they offered up an elected lawmaker from Georgia, a state representative from Atlanta, Palestinian woman named Aurora Rahman. She wrote a speech which was then vetted by the DNC, a speech, by the way, that endorsed Kamala Harris for president. So the DNC still said, well, you can't come on stage, even though we'll have the Israeli parents of a hostage in Gaza, which was a good move. All of us support the idea of calling for hostages to be released from Gaza. But to have the Israeli parents of a hostage on stage and then say, but we're not going to have a Palestinian American on stage, even though your platform says we value Israeli and Palestinian lives together, is discriminatory. There's no other word for that. It's erasure of Palestinians. And by the way, it's dumb, Ali. It's just dumb. The Democrats missed out on an opportunity in prime time to have a Palestinian American lawmaker from a swing state in a hijab endorse Kamala Harris. That's just dumb. As we discussed before the break, it's a close election. You need every vote.
Let me just push back on something that Mehdi Hasan said here when he said they missed an opportunity. They didn't miss out on anything. They are doing what their donors want them to do. I'm pretty sure AIPAC was in that convention. I'm pretty sure they were there. I wouldn't be surprised if J Street was there as well. So Kamala Harris not allowing a Palestinian American to speak on that stage, that's exactly what AIPAC and J Street wanted her to do. So once again, this goes back to the money and the corruption. She's not answering to the people. She's answering to the donors. So you always have to follow the money trail. Don't forget Kamala Harris. They're saying she got a lot of small money donations. Yeah, but she also received billionaire donations too. Remember when she first announced, they said Wall Street is backing her. So she is doing the bidding of those donors. Everybody has to put this connection here. You have to connect the pieces of the puzzle. Who is really making the decisions? Now, if Kamala Harris didn't have corporate money, and if Kamala Harris just was relying on grassroots donations like Bernie Sanders did, this could have been a whole different story. But then she also probably wouldn't have been standing up on that stage as the nominee. Always follow the money.
Ruler Oman's going to join me in the next hour. He is an elected Palestinian American representative in the Georgia State House. Part of the frustration with this is it wouldn't have been hard to do the right thing on this one. Your argument that you've made is that Kamala Harris is pointed in the right direction on this issue.
Definitely, absolutely. First of all, I'm Palestinian American, so thank you for having me on this show.
Yes, sir.
So there's more Palestinian
American. A lot of negotiation
went
into this.
Right, than under DNC. And look, that's a political choice by them. They're saying who we're going to value. That's the reality. I will say this about Vice President Harris. Her words about dignity, self-determination of Palestinians and security was historic. I went back and looked at every Democratic National Convention speech, Democratic candidate accepting the nomination. Only one said the word Palestine. 1996, Bill Clinton. Nobody ever said dignity, self-determination. The crowd cheered. I wish my late Palestinian father was there, not just to see the words.
Pause. This is the second time you have heard during this story from both videos, the crowd cheered. Who's in the crowd? You have delegates and you have influencers, and the influencers are paid. They're paid to be there. People have to understand that. So again, who is in the crowd? Mainly the delegates, the influencers, and corporate interest. So you have Wall Street there. You have big donors there. So keep in mind who's in that crowd when they say the crowd cheers.
But they hear the crowd cheer, but it's policy. That's what everyone wants to see. So look, she's a candidate. She's telling us maybe this is going to be her policy. We need an articulation of policy so this ends, this nightmare in Gaza, like it's something out of World War I that we're living through here. My family's in the West Bank. We've seen more taking of land in the last year and settler violence than we've seen in years. And the Netanyahu and his administration are backing this. So I don't come at this from political. It's personal for me and many in my community. Our families are being killed, driven off their land, terrorized with American weaponry, with the backing of the United States of America at the UN, vetoing resolutions. That's got to end. That's the policy we want to see. And of course, complying with U.S. law in terms of the Foreign Security Assistance Act. You can't use our weapons in violation of international law. That's already a law. Just apply the law we have. Nothing new. Apply that law.
Pause for a second. He just told you that his family is in the West Bank. Notice how you don't hear Kamala Harris say anything about what's happening in the West Bank? And I want to tell you why. They don't bring up the land seizure in the West Bank because when it comes to the West Bank, they cannot use the excuse that Israel has a right to defend itself. This is why they're silent on that issue. Because how is that defense when you're stealing homes from Palestinian people? The Palestinians in the West Bank can't defend themselves at all. If their homes are stolen, they're just stolen and they become refugees. Then they have to migrate somewhere else. That's why they don't bring this up. Everybody notice this? So whenever you hear these conversations and people say, well, Gaza, well, it all started October 7th, which I've told you multiple times on the show, it did not begin on October 7th, that the oppression, the occupation has been there for decades, that they have gone into Gaza before and they have mowed the lawn. This is not the first time Israel has bombed schools in Gaza. They have done this before. So it did not start on October 7th. But when you get that rhetoric from people and they say, well, it's all October 7th, bring up the West Bank. Bring up the West Bank and let them try to explain to you how Israel has a right to defend themselves there when they, again, are the aggressor. Those Palestinians living in those homes in the West Bank, trying to mind their own business, go to work and do their damn job and come back home. But if everyone in the house leaves to go to work, when you come back home, there may not be a home for you to come back to. That's just the reality of the situation there in the West Bank. So Kamala Harris isn't talking about that, and nobody's pressing her to talk about that. Now, fast forward. Thursday is supposed to be the very first interview of Kamala Harris and Tim Walz. Dana Bash is supposed to be hosting that interview. So, of course, they got someone who is a self-described Zionist to do the interview. You know, she's going to ask about Israel and Gaza. Kamala's going to have Tim Walz right there by her side. So she might have a shoulder to lean on and feel a little bit more comfortable when pressed on that issue. So we'll have to see. And I will be covering that interview. So there's that. So we'll have to see what is said in that interview. But again, you always have to remind yourself, there's a difference between the rhetoric and the actions. There's a difference between what you're saying to the uncommitted movement in public versus what you are saying in private. And like I told you, her rhetoric is different in public than it is in private. You told those people that in private, you were open to an arms embargo, but publicly you said no, you would never condition aid to Israel, and that Israel still has the right to defend itself. So Kamala Harris is already showing you how she would be as president. This is no different than Biden. This is no different than Obama. These are just campaign promises that she's running on, which I would argue she's not going to fulfill most of them.
Mehdi Hasan, it was interesting in the emotional farewell, as it were, by Joe Biden. There was so much clapping and so much cheering. It was a line that almost got missed, where Joe Biden referred to the protesters. He said, "Those protesters out in the street, they have a point. A lot of innocent people are being killed on both sides." Little small things, but it seemed to show some movement, which I think gave people some hope that they might spare 2 minutes for a Palestinian American in all the hours that they had. Why do you think they didn't?
That is the $64,000 question. Was it racism? Was it fear? Was it cowardice? Was it just incompetence and bad judgment? There's multiple reasons they didn't do it. I just think it was a huge mistake, an unforced error, an own goal. By the way, you mentioned Joe Biden saying,
I'm just sorry. I'm going to say it again. It was not an error. It was what she was told to do, more than likely by AIPAC or J Street.
Had a point. I'm glad he said that. He also said both sides. A reminder to all your viewers, 33 times as many Palestinians have been killed since October 7th as Israelis were killed on October the 7th. The assault is still going on. And Joe Biden and Kamala Harris are not innocent bystanders, just observers in the corner. Unfortunately, this administration is complicit in the killing. We send the bombs and the arms, as Dean says, in violation of American and international law. And the policy is what matters, right? And Dean's right to say that statement was a first or a second a DNC. I should point out the language she used has been used by Joe Biden and others in other settings. It's not unprecedented language, but he's right to say that at a speech, to get applause was a big deal, right? Every time Palestinian rights were mentioned on the stage, and it was only a handful of times, by AOC, by Keith Ellison, by Bernie Sanders, by Kamala Harris, it got huge applause. That Harris line, huge applause. And wherever I went at the convention, delegates came up to me, black, brown, white, saying, keep speaking up about Gaza, please. So the base supports this issue. The party wants a stronger line on Israel. It's just that the leadership's not willing to do it. And I've got to say one thing about that speech line. Dean mentioned the positive line. What really upset me was not just the erasure of a Palestinian from the stage, but Harris went out of her way to condemn the specific sexual violence on October the 7th by Hamas, but didn't mention the sexual violence that we've seen documented against Palestinians in detention right now by Israeli forces.
Yeah, and that's come out in recent months, and it's been very, very.
I will say, very impressed that Mehdi mentioned that on MSNBC. Very impressed. Yes, that is very telling. How can you talk about one side when it comes to sexual assault, but you are not willing to mention the other side when it comes to sexual assault? Maybe this is probably why they got rid of Mehdi. He can come back on as a guest, but they won't let him work there. They said, Mehdi, no. But the reality is that is something I want more people to mention and to call out as well, that she is ignoring the evidence that has been presented. Again, we have evidence that there has been sexual abuse at the Palestinian detention center, and she didn't mention it at all. And again, I'm pretty sure AIPAC wouldn't want her to mention it, just like I'm pretty sure AIPAC didn't want her to bring a Palestinian American up on that stage, even though the speech was already vetted. got to follow the money. We'll finish this clip up here.
Clearly documented. Guys, thanks very much. Mehdi Hasan is an award-winning journalist and founder and CEO and editor-in-chief of Zateo. Dean Obeidallah is the host of the Dean Obeidallah Show on SiriusXM, author of the Dean's Report on Substack. He's an MSNBC daily columnist. All right.
So Mehdi got a chance to promote his new network too. So there's that too as well. But Common Dreams, they're really good on this, and they called it out. Why are liberal Zionists cheering as Harris echoes Biden on Gaza? J Street is eager to define the limits of acceptable criticism of Israeli government policies from the Democratic Party establishment, setting aside human rights as secondary to the mantra of Israel's right to exist. Let's go to this part here. Discussing Gaza, Harris' DNC acceptance speech began with the evocation of working on a ceasefire, of Gaza's pounding that America is funding. President Biden and I are working around the clock, yada, yada, that same narrative, right? Then I want you to listen to this. Key to Harris' brief discussion of Gaza in her acceptance speech was the customary refusal in American political discourse to attribute the slaughter to the U.S. or its Israeli partner. Instead, there was a reference to what has happened, evoking victims without victimizers in this way. What has happened in Gaza over the past 10 months is devastating. So many innocent lives lost, desperate, hungry people fleeing for safety over and over again. The scale of suffering is heartbreaking. But you will notice there is no mention of Israel as being the responsibility for that. It goes on here. I want to highlight this part. Style aside, what Harris articulated about Israel and Palestine in her speech was no different than what President Joe Biden has been saying and doing since last fall while enabling the slaughter of Palestinian civilians. So let me tell you why people think that it's different. People think it's different because corporate media told you that it was different. There's this little thing they used to have us do with the students, and they used to always tell us, like, if you want something to really be drilled into their head so that they remember to do it, you keep repeating it over and over again. So oftentimes, like, I would send an email to students and I would repeat over again, here are the directions, here are the instructions, just a reminder, because the thing is, once you tell people something over and over again, eventually it starts to sink in. Corporate media has told you over and over again that Kamala is different than Biden on this issue. Whether it's CNN or MSNBC, you've heard it time and time again. And the more you hear it, the more you're going to believe it. And if you haven't been paying attention to what Joe Biden has said, it's going to be easier for you to believe it. But even if you have heard what Joe Biden has said, because corporate media told you that she's different, you start to believe it. It's like all of a sudden you don't even remember what you heard Joe Biden say. These things happen. Repetition works. Unless you know that's what they're trying to do. Right? Natalie said it's called gaslighting. Exactly. So the reason why so many of the people that were pro-Palestinian protesters believe that Kamala's rhetoric is different is because that's what the media told them. The media told them it was different. So they keep telling you the same thing over and over, and eventually you'll believe it. Another part that I want to point out here. See, we can do Control F on here. Nope, we can't do Control F on here. There was a part here about democracy that I wanted to highlight. Let's see. Here it is, right about here. This is something I want you guys to focus on. For J Street's leadership, the current U.S. policy hits the spot. J Street, by the way, is the liberal version of AIPAC, although AIPAC funds Democrats as well. They could not be prouder of VP Harris for her remarks on Israel and Palestine and of the Democrats' reaction. So you see that? One of the donors is happy about the way she responded. That's not a good sign. That tells you who she's working for. Listen to this part right here. Ben Ami tweeted after the convention adjourned. This is what it means in 2024 to be pro-Israel, pro-peace, pro-democracy. Notice they don't say pro-Palestine. Notice they don't say pro-Palestinian. Pay attention to that. But I want you to really phone in on this word right here, democracy. This is what it means in 2024 to be pro-Israel, pro-peace, and pro-democracy. We have been hearing that word a lot, haven't we? Not just this year, but last year. They've been saying democracy, democracy, democracy. We have to protect our democracy, they tell you. They tell you that Donald Trump should not be reelected if we want to protect our democracy, right? They're telling you that these third-party candidates should not be on the ballot so that we can protect our democracy. So these other parties, like the Democratic Party, has been actively removing third-party candidates off the ballot to protect our democracy, as if that's democratic. But that word, they have been playing us with that word for decades. And I want to take you back. Roger Meadows, he gave me this book. Shout out to Roger. Roger gave me this book for my birthday last time I was in New York. It's called A. Philip Randolph, A Life in the Vanguard. Now, I started to read the book and I got busy, as I tend to do, when I had to put the book down, just story of my life. But recently, I've been able to pick the book back up. My dad always told me, and my grandmother said this too, what you are seeing today, there is nothing new under the sun. There is nothing new that has not been done before. And I want to show you something that is mentioned in this book about democracy. A. Philip Randolph turned away from W.E.B. Du Bois. Listen to this now. Because W.E.B. urged Black Americans to support World War I. Let me read you this excerpt right here. While Randolph's pacifism introduced him to new friends, it also resulted in a rift with others. This is A. Philip Randolph. It was during the war that he stopped idolizing W.E.B. Du Bois. In July of 1918 issue of The Crisis, Du Bois urged Black Americans to forget our special grievances and close our ranks shoulder to shoulder with our own white fellow citizens and the allied nations that are fighting for, what's that word? Democracy. Harlem radicals reacted to Du Bois' message with shock. Black socialists such as Hubert Harrison and Randolph were incensed, particularly after they learned that the army was planning to commission Du Bois as a captain. Then it goes into President Wilson. Democracy. Here was W.E.B. Du Bois, who a lot of people love. A lot of academics praise him. But as I've been reading more about him, he was kind of, elite, bougie, let's kind of stay in the lines dude. And I'm reading more about A. Philip Randolph, who was trying to tell people, no, the workers are not going to win this way. So W.E.B. said he was making the case for African Americans to support World War I. This is around World War I. And using the excuse of democracy. Why am I showing you this, ladies and gentlemen? They've been doing this for decades. We got to protect democracy. Israel is the only democracy in the Middle East. Trump can't win because our democracy is at stake. What's on the ballot? Democracy. They have been playing the same game for decades. They've been playing us. So none of this is new. We have to remember this when people tell you, but democracy is on the ballot. They've been saying this 1918. I highly encourage everyone, and it's a quick read. Everyone, read this book about A. Philip Randolph, because he was the socialist that I think some of us would have wanted WEB to be. This is the guy who started the first black union. He was for the workers. And he said, no, we can't go along with the establishment. We can't go along. We should not support the wars. WEB said, we got to stand shoulder to shoulder, protect democracy. The older I get and the more that I read, the more I'm starting to realize a lot of these figures that were promoted in the classroom when I was growing up, these mofos were kind of milquetoast. So you hear the same thing today. And what I'm here to, I just want to shake everybody a little bit, just shake you up a little bit and just tell you that a lot of the people that were activists, if you don't hear about them, there's usually a reason for that. And the people who are heavily pushed and promoted in the classroom, there's usually a reason for that too. Those people tend to be a little bit more status quo. Notice how they promoted MLK, but they found ways to criticize Malcolm X. They found ways to criticize the Black Panthers, even though Black Panthers were doing mutual aid and started the first breakfast program. These are things you had to find out on your own. And some of the academics are notorious for promoting like the WEBs and like they don't say anything about A. Philip Randolph. A. Philip Randolph was far more like based. He said, no, you cannot join them. You cannot go with them. So we connect this to this war in Gaza. We connect this to what's happening to the Palestinian people. And I'm pretty sure if A. Philip Randolph was alive today, this speech that Kamala Harris gave about Israel, I'm pretty sure he would probably tell you, you cannot join forces with them. If you want to vote against genocide, you cannot support the parties that support the genocide. You cannot support the parties that support the state of Israel. You have to push back. The only way the workers win is by not joining the establishment that wants to censor and shut down the workers. Never forget that.